family and get started. Good to see everyone. This is Charlie Zelli, Chair of the Met Council, and this is the Green Line Extension Corridor Management Committee. Welcome to the members. Just a couple of little housekeeping items that everybody knows so well. If you are having any technical difficulties, please feel free to let us know in the chat, or you can reach out to any one of us and we'll try to solve that. Also, please be mindful to mute if you're not speaking. And so everybody knows, we are recording this meeting, and it is open for the public for those that would like to review it later. And if you are a member of the public and want to make any comments, please feel free to email Sophia Guinness, Ginis, at metrotransit.org. We really have until February 11th, and we'll include your comments in the project website. And if you're interested in looking for any handouts or even the presentation, check out the website, which is greenlineext. That's just one word, greenlineext.org. So as a way to start the meeting and welcome everybody, why don't we introduce ourselves by organization or local government? And if I name the organization, maybe people can jump in and introduce themselves. Let's start with Met Council.
Molly Cummings, Met Council, District 5, Hopkins, Edina, Richfield, and Bloomington.
Great, Molly. Anyone else? Any other members? All right, how about Hennepin County?
Good morning, everyone. Debbie Gotel, Hennepin County Commissioner, District 5, Bloomington, Richfield, and most of Eden Prairie. Very glad to be on this and hear the great updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
And good morning, everyone. Chris Latonders here, Hennepin County Commissioner for District 6, representing Hopkins, Edina, Northern Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, and 12 communities around Lake Minnetonka.
Welcome.
Irene Fernando is here, but I'm actually seeing multiple colleagues, so I think I'll depart. Are you going to depart? Okay, you'll intro yourself and depart. Okay, hi everybody, County Commissioner, District 2 and Rail Authority Chair. Just wanting to make sure we were good on our side.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Fernando. Good morning, everybody. It's Marion Green, Commissioner from District 3, which is Southwest Minneapolis and St. Louis Park. And as Commissioner Fernando has alluded, all four of us cannot be here, and I'm an alternate. So I will depart, and I look forward to an update at another time.
Good to see you, Commissioner Green. We'll fill you in. Okay, how about Eden Prairie? Eden Prairie? Minnetonka.
Good morning, Brad Wiersum, Mayor of Minnetonka. It's good to be with you all.
Hey, Mayor, good to see you. Hopkins.
Hi, good morning, Patrick Hanlon, Mayor of Hopkins, and I think I'm joined by Councilmember Hunke and Kirsten Elverum as well. And good morning to everyone.
Welcome. St. Louis Park.
He'll be getting on within about 10 minutes. He has to do a press conference at City Hall, and so he said he'd be getting on shortly.
Perfect. Well, thank you. And Mayor, since you've popped up, how about Edina?
Yep, Edina is here. Jim Hovland.
Good to see you.
I could represent Baja, Edina, Eden Prairie too, if you want me to.
Sure. Anyway, he was here from Minneapolis. Minneapolis? How about MnDOT? Don't see anybody. In Metro Transit?
Morning, Chair. Nick Thompson, Deputy General Manager, Metro Transit.
Hi, Nick. How about the Community Advisory Committee?
Assad Alawi with the New American Development Center.
Welcome, Assad. And last but not least, the Business Advisory Committee.
Morning, Chair Zelli and all. Will Roach, co-chair with the Business Advisory Committee.
Welcome,
Morning, Dan.
Will.
Good morning, Dan Duffy, the other co-chair on the Business Advisory Committee.
Hey, Dan. Okay, did I miss anybody? All right, hearing none, we have a full agenda and plenty of opportunities for comments. But first, the minutes were sent out Tuesday for review. And if there are any edits, please let me know. I think Dawn actually has an edit already in her scope. So, Dawn, maybe you could share that.
Yes, it was noted that on the minutes from December 1st, on the last paragraph under number 4, the dollar amount should be 1.6 billion. I had 1.6 million. So the sentence should read, Commissioner Latendresse commented that the dollars spent for redevelopment has already been 1.6 billion.
Just a few decimal points. Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. Good catch. Any other edits? And if not, with that one edit, I would entertain a motion to approve and a second.
Move.
Thank you, Mayor Hovland. Is there a second?
Second, Gotel.
Thank you, Commissioner. And with that, Dawn, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Cummings,
Aye.
Commissioner Latendresse,
Aye.
Commissioner Gotel,
Aye.
Commissioner Fernando,
Aye.
Mayor Hovland,
Aye.
Mayor Hanlon,
Aye.
Mayor Wiersum,
Abstain.
Will Roach.
Aye.
Dan Duffy,
Aye.
Assad Alawi,
Aye.
and Chair Zelli.
Aye. Those minutes are approved. So I just want to make just a few brief comments because we want to get into a lot of the substance of our agenda. But no mystery here. Last week was really a big week for the project. First, I really want to thank all the committee members for your expressions of support, encouragement, keeping this project moving forward. We all recognize its value. And clearly, we are all disappointed at the delays that we anticipate. And then with that, the associated costs. This is frustrating, I think, for everybody, particularly those of us and many of you, all of you who have been so encouraging and for decades to advance this really important project. I think it's best interest for the region that we try to get this open as soon as possible, so we can talk more about the steps we're taking to assure that happens. But also, we really want to address the issues of the increased associated costs due to the delay. This is something we really clearly project team takes very seriously, and we are at a point now where we can really go into details about what we are seeing and what we anticipate. Also, when you think about this project that's gone through so many phases of early planning back in the 1980s, and the first right-of-way was purchased by the Hennepin County Regional Rail Authority, it's been a vision that I think we have always stayed true to advancing the work, despite the complications and despite the kind of the challenges that this particular line has had. But it's really notable that we've really been, I hate to say that this is not a pun, but we've been in alignment. We've been in alignment to really advance and recognize the importance that this line has to the larger kind of interconnected transit system for the whole metro area. So before we really get into it and hear a presentation, I just want to open it up and see if there's any additional questions from CMC members and any questions, comments that anyone might have at this point. I'd be curious what you all are hearing from your own communities and businesses, and maybe secondarily, is there any way we can support you in as we kind of think through these next steps?
Chair Zelli, Brad Wiersum.
Sure, go ahead, Mayor.
You know, it's interesting. I have not heard that much from my community, but clearly people who oppose the project are using this opportunity to tell us their opinion and how wrong we were to pursue this. And while the news that we've had is disappointing, these are significant bumps in the road, but they're bumps in the road. And strategically, and the reason we are pursuing this project and why it's so important for not just the cities along the line, but for our entire region, continue to be valid. And so, I'm heartened by that. We all in elected office get a few nasty grams every once in a while. That comes with the territory. But overall, I haven't heard that much. It's the bad news, the negative shots are kind of from the usual suspects. So it is what it is. If we were right strategically, and we are, let's stay positive and march forward.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Mayor Hovland, you might be muted. Are you speaking?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was muted. I know that Mayor Spano has had some interactions with people in his community, and when he gets on here, it may be a little out of sequence, but I think he may want to address some of these issues that have arisen that are of concern to him, and then also maybe revisiting even some of those initial decisions that were made years ago about the route selection process, and maybe just a reminder of why the corridor down through the Greenway and up Nicollet was not going to be as viable as the one that was chosen through the Kenilworth corridor, the freight reroute. So there may be some folks out there that Mayor Wiersum's alluded to that need some reminders of why the route was selected that we selected. And let's not forget, and I'll join Mayor Wiersum in saying the line doesn't run through Edina. And so I'm actually grateful that I was a voice that could be, our community had a voice here that in a way is more objective. And I joined Mayor Wiersum in saying, and a reminder to everybody, this is the largest public works project in the history of the state of Minnesota. And there are going to be, as he said, bumps along the way and some troublesome spots. And I think that we're going to see a cost expenditure over what was anticipated in the neighborhood of $400-500 million. We're going to figure out how to solve that issue. And we'll do it together and maybe in conjunction with the federal government. But I think we need to move full speed ahead. This is going to allow us to put a system in place in the Twin Cities. We're going to end up with a tremendous light rail system that makes us a globally significant player from an economic development standpoint. For those folks that want to back out of this thing or are criticizing the decisions that were made, I think some of them are the same suspects. There may be more, but just a reminder, and I had this conversation yesterday with Commissioner Latondras, that we would stand to suffer quite a significant penalty in the $1 billion range from the federal government if we decided to try to unwind this thing. And then try to unwind it would cost several hundred more million, and we've already expended, as you indicated in the minutes, $1.6 billion. So we need to deal with these problems that are in front of us, solve them, keep moving forward. and get this thing done. And over the next 100 years, this is going to serve our metropolitan region very effectively. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that comment, and we'll certainly give space for Mayor Spano when he's able to join us. But any other comments, questions? I will say, and we're going to hear from Jim Alexander here in a minute, but you know, the idea of actually having an agreement in place that we can now have a schedule to create accountability in a way that can be transparent and is real, given the issues we're facing, is a really important step. Because you know, this has been a very complicated negotiation to reconfigure this project, and having witnessed some of this work, it has not been easy. But we're at a phase now where we can be much more open, and though disappointing, it's real, and it's a way that we can get our arms around this project the best we can to protect taxpayers and the schedule. Because if we did nothing, it could be much worse. But I see Mayor Spano is joining us. Jake, do you have a comment? We were just asking for questions, comments, and we thought you might have an important point of view on this.
Well, I apologize for being late, Chair. I was participating in a press conference for MPCA here that's being held just right in the next room here. So I had to step out from that, but I appreciate giving me the opportunity. And I don't know, again, not, you know, I imagine that you all have obviously done a few things, but I'm not sure if you've done your presentation or Jim's done his. I'm happy to hold my comments, you know, for after presentations are done. I don't need to jump in front of the line.
No, not at all. We're just opening it up for initial comments. Jim has just about to start, so we could, if you want to see anything now or wait till later, we're.
I'm happy to wait.
Okay.
I'd love to hear kind of I'd love to hear Jim's presentation, and that may answer some of my questions. So
sure, let's. I know a lot of questions are going to be answered, so this is an appropriate time. Everybody may know, but the Metro Greenland Extension Project Director Jim Alexander has been on the. He's been on the mission for many years, and I've had been able to know Jim when I was Commissioner of Transportation and know some of the work he was doing on the early work. So, Jim, take it away.
All right, thank you, Chair. Advance the slide there. Okay, so we have talked about our challenges on this project, and you know, there's really, we've been talking mostly about two key issues, but there's really three issues at hand that we've been dealing with our civil contractor, London McCross joint venture on this, and that's kind of really why we're where we are today in terms of looking at a settlement agreement. So the first is the corridor protection wall. We've talked about this quite a bit. You can kind of see in the lower left, that's what the wall looks like under the Van White Boulevard bridge there. That's where Bassett Creek Valley Station will be located. And as we've talked, this is a requirement for BNSF, and we were going through environmental clearance really at the same time we were out for bid on the civil construction project. And we all went into this knowing that we would add this as a change order. However, we didn't expect the cost to be as much as they were, and we didn't expect that there would be the impact to the schedule, the construction schedule, as we have been working with the contractor. So the next item, next slide 6, please, is this is really our challenge, the Canterbury Tunnel. And the secant pile, we talked about this, that we have to do a secant pile along where the condominium buildings are located toward the south end of the half-mile or so tunnel. And this because of that, it's really impacted the tunnel sequencing. I've taken some of you out on tours to show you what this thing looks like. I think we have a video actually. We're going to show what goes into the components, but it's a challenge, and I'll just say that it's more of a challenge than when we anticipated when we were sitting around the drawing table with our engineers looking at this and trying to figure out how we're going to get this tunnel through. it's a big bear, and but we're going to get through it. And this is part of the reason why we're at the settlement agreement table with the contractor. Next slide, please. So here's some images of what that tunnel is looking like. The construction, you can see the condominium towers off in the distance on the image to the left, and on the right is the contractor installing the secant pile wall next to that condominium structure. Next slide, please. So this third component, we haven't really talked a lot about other than we added this to the project post bid. The city had a CMAQ grant, and so this was added to the project. The contractor has cited this as a kind of a third primary element of adding to their work that has disrupted their schedule in terms of getting their original bid plan done on this project. Again, 14.5 miles that the civil contractor needs to complete. This station is pretty far along, as you can see in the image there. That's earlier this winter with the construction. Core system still needs to come out and do the work as well. So next slide, please. So as I indicated, you know, a lot of unexpected, but you know, we're taking a lot of heat on this thing, and you know, we'll continue to take that heat until this thing gets done. But I'll tell you that you know, we have a lot of smart consulting engineers working on this project. We pretty much have most of the engineering firms in the region working on our project in some fashion or another. And we rely on those engineering consultants to help guide us on what we're doing here. And we feel like this is a good plan, and we will get this thing done, but it is complicated, as we'll show you with the video coming up. Next slide, please. So we tried to simplify this a little bit, because I know last time we talked in December, and as I mentioned, you know, we have the civil construction contract, but we're not done there yet. We need to get to systems as well. But we had the original civil construction schedule and cost. That bid came in just under 800 million, and we had a schedule set to get that done in towards later this year, originally planned. But because of those issues, we need to revise that schedule, and so we're adding some months to that civil construction schedule. But this is going to be done through an agreement, what we're calling a settlement agreement. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the outcome of that will be a revised construction schedule for the civil construction and associated costs. So maybe a bigger picture on the next slide here is we're here, and essentially with that revised construction schedule, we think we've landed on that number in terms of what we're looking toward agreement on, and along with the schedule. But the next step is we need to get a revision of the systems schedule, because the systems is all reliant on the civil construction. Essentially, there's a kind of a handoff, if you will, of the areas that are constructed by a civil contractor that eventually needs to be handed off to the systems contractor to do their work. And the systems, you may recall, that's the catenary system, that's all the cabling, all the communication pieces that need to be installed, traction power substations, signal houses, that type of thing. But we're not done there yet. After we get the systems done, we need to understand what our supporting contracts need to be amended to see us out through the ultimate build out of this project. And there's testing and just getting all those pieces put together. Now, we're working all this in parallel, but it really has to start with the civil to understand what the system is going to do, to understand what the testing and the ultimate schedule is going to look like. But ultimately, it gets us to a revised project opening day and cost. Next slide, please. So with the introduction of these issues, we actually brought on a independent expert, Venable. I mentioned that in the past. We brought them on about 1.5 years ago, as I was actually seeing that we had some issues with trying to get the civil construction done, and said we need some help. So we looked to the MnDOT model, and we brought on a company called Troner that helped MnDOT through the St. Croix project. They are our claims expert and look at scheduling and costs. But through that process, we end up getting a firm called Venable who works on these type of mega projects. Ken Roberts is in charge of the work that on this project, and he is well versed in working on mega projects throughout the United States as well also abroad. Next slide, please. So what we've done so far is that we sought approval from our Met Council back on Wednesday last week to enter into a settlement agreement. So that essentially allows us to negotiate and execute the settlement agreement. And the next step we took later on at the end of last week is we went to the Executive Change Control Board to approve advancing that settlement agreement. Now, the Executive Change Control Board, maybe recall, is made up of County Commissioners, Chair Zelli, and we have Councilmember Cummings on that as well. And but we have another step to make at a future meeting, Executive Change Control Board meeting, to consider for final approval the negotiated settlement and the use of up to $210 million in contingency. And I want to pause on that a moment because we're not necessarily saying that our settlement agreement is going to land at 210. We are going to go through an evaluative mediation process on issues that we don't agree with. We'll come up with an assessment of what we think this is worth to settle with the contractor. The contractor will have their number. And we're going to meet to see if we can get to agreement on that. But areas we don't come to an agreement, that'll go through a mediation process. And ultimately, if the mediation process doesn't solve the problem, it'll go through arbitration. So I want to point out that this number could end up being less than 210. It could possibly be more than 210. We are hopeful that we keep it well under 210, but this allows us to encumber up to that amount through this process. If we have to go above that 210, we will go back to our council for approval authority as well as the ECCB. Next slide, please. So the principles of the agreement framework, it really establishes that dispute resolution process that I mentioned. And we feel like this is really something that can really validate the numbers. So, we're just not making it up, and we have someone looking over our shoulder to make sure that, okay, it ends up being the right number. And again, if that doesn't get resolved through a mediator through that process, it ultimately goes through a binding arbitration process. But what this does is establishes a new civil construction schedule, which we really need. The contractor has been working in good faith over the past year without really a schedule that is workable. We have the original contract schedule in place in the contract. We need a new schedule into the contract, and the purpose of this whole settlement process is to get that schedule established. Now, people have been asking us, well, how come you didn't know this? Why couldn't you figure this out in January? We have been negotiating with the contractor over the past year to get to this new schedule. There's been a lot of back and forth. We've had the Troner folks, we've had our internal folks looking at this, really trying to kick the tires, so to speak, on this schedule to make sure that we can get a schedule that is not only doable from the contractor's perspective as well as ours, but it's also fair. We don't want to be allowing the contractor to be out there too long and then paying too much. It's kind of a right fit here. But it also defines this agreement defines the payment schedule for the costs, and really most importantly, this path avoids potential litigation. And I think, we go to litigation, really nobody wins. We see that in Maryland, where the Maryland project essentially paid $250 million to the contractor as they left the project, and they're gone. So that's just a check that just goes out the window, so to speak. And they still have more costs to deal with. We are avoiding this process of litigation process through this agreement framework process that we have established. Next slide, please. So what the schedule does, it adds a little over 34 months to the civil construction schedule. So that will bring us to toward the September or third quarter of 2025 to finish that. And the LRT tunnel is really the long lead item, and that's looking to be done in that earlier part of 2025. I know I've already been getting a lot of questions about what little components, the trails and roadways and bridges, when are those going to be open? We are still getting that sorted out, and we'll be able to maybe talk about that a little more fluidly in terms of what individual components will be done when. But we essentially have the overall schedule, I think, nailed down at this juncture, subject to getting the settlement agreement signed. And this really realigns the sequence for which the different various construction segments are completed. It's 14.5 miles long. There are a number of segments that have their own completion dates that were in the original contract. Those will be revised per this settlement agreement. And we really have been very cognizant of trying to understand how that handover is going to be from the civil contractor to the systems contractor. Very important. We have a fluid motion there. The systems contractor has been working with us. They're starting to develop their schedule as well. And we think we have a pretty good handle on where they're going to be, but there's still negotiation with that contract as well. Next slide, please. So we'll use this dispute resolution process to resolve the costs eventually. And they're really around these five categories. There's extended performance. So if I'm going to finish a project on year 1, and now I have to finish that project in year 3, there's going to be additional costs associated with that, because there's going to be the people involved in that project that are still on the job. And so that's where this category comes to play, where we would be essentially compensating the contractor for being on the project longer than originally anticipated. There's going to be labor and material escalation. We're really seeing that it's just kind of gone crazy out there with some of the commodities, and we're trying to get our arms around that as best as possible. We do have some really good consultants that look at the costs of construction costs here and really understand what is fair and reasonable. So we'll be getting that negotiated, get that piece negotiated as well. Subcontractor costs, that's a big component. There are a whole slew of subcontractors on this civil contract. A lot of DBEs involved, so we want to make sure that the subcontractors are getting compensated as well, not just the prime contractors. We also want to close out known change orders. These are changes that have kind of been in the queue that haven't been executed, and we want to get those processed through this mechanism so we can hopefully go on as a clean slate as possible. There may still be some change orders that need to be cleaned up, but I would advise that there are going to be more change orders on this project. It's just a function of this work. Going back to the green line, we had over 1,700 change orders all told for 4 contracts. Change orders will happen on these type of projects anytime you get into construction, but the intent here is really to get the backlog, if you will, of change orders behind us and get that into place. And the last one, just the impacts to productivity, work performed per date. An example of this is that when we were driving piles around in Eden Prairie around Shop HQ, we had to work at night to avoid impacts to that facility, because they essentially recorded almost 24/7, but there was a respite from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. that we could do our work. We had to do a lot of reconfiguring to kind of figure out how we could get that pile work done. We eventually got it done, but there was a productivity impact to the contractor because there's a lot of stops and starts to get that work going. Next slide, please. So overall picture, I think this is the big piece that's really been kind of hitting people hard as well as us, is that we are projecting opening day in 2027. We hope that's a conservative date. As I said, we are still in the process of finalizing a system schedule, so we don't know fully exactly when that's going to be done, but we think within the 2027 we can make that date with what we've seen so far. The other piece I mentioned is the testing, and I've talked to some of you about. We're really looking at seeing how we can modify our testing program to kind of work within the schedules. We know the tunnel is a long lead item, so we are looking at the idea of getting testing done from both ends, west to the tunnel and then from Target Field going over toward 394. We think that would be advantageous for the project as a whole to get to revenue service earlier, and it's something we're working with our operations folks. So I'm just advising this is going to be in the future, but we hope at some point that we're out testing trains on the west end, but we won't be yet in revenue service. So that's going to be something we'll have to manage from a communication perspective. But we see that as being able to kick the tires again, get the bugs out, because the testing is something that's really a lot of unknowns going into it, and things are going to go wrong, and we need to have time to fix those issues that come up. It's just a lot of software issues and a lot of connectivity issues that need to get resolved. But we think we can achieve by 2027 to get to that final opening day there. So next slide, please. So a lot of questions about where's the money coming from. We will need more funds for this project. We have undergone cutting measures in the past, which I'm sure you all well know. We cut the OMF, for example, from the OMF or from Hopkins, and but we're over 60% completed on this project, and get a lot of questions. Well, can we just stop? Well, we can't just stop. There's a lot of infrastructure that's already been built to kind of retract from where we are today. We essentially have to, for example, we'd have to rebuild the Glenwood Avenue Bridge, take away all the components we built in the BNSF corridor. That's as per our agreement with BNSF. We had to put it back to original condition. That would just be money just kind of floating in the wind there a little bit. We don't really want to. That's just really not a feasible alternative. Another question we've been probably anticipating is that we're not going to be seeking funding from city partners back in, I think, 2015, where we were looking for funds to get us lifted up from where we were at that time. We are working with our funding partners. There's FTA, there's the county, and we're also working with the governor's office on this. So. But we still have more work to do. And I don't know if I want to pause there, Mr. Chair, if you wanted to say any words on that.
No, I agree with you and the project team that we are really committed with our partners to marching forward and solving the funding gap, but most importantly, to finish the project. So, and that's the most prudent course for all parties, and especially for the economy of the region and Minnesota.
All right, maybe next slide, please. So just a little comparison about how that matches up with other peer groups. We have been pretty consistent on our projects being Houston. We're well under those cost per mile, if you will. Our previous with our previous numbers at 2.2, I think we're just a little over 150 million per mile. With the revision of we're forecasting between 450 and 550 million dollars more needed more on this project. We're in the range of 180 to 190 million dollars per mile. Peer projects running well above that, 200 to 500 million. And just want to not to put that as an excuse, just want to put it up for perspective. Next slide, please. So a little bit of construction highlights. We did cover a little bit this back in December, but just kind of reminding folks, we will be coming out with 2022, what's going to be happening. That's going to be more likely our next meeting. But just remind folks that we are pretty far along here. We're 60% complete on the civil construction, about 62 actually, and the systems contractor is actually starting to do work out in the field. A lot of work behind the scenes on that contract because there's a lot of design build effort getting submittals done, but they're up and raring to go. And then prior to revenue service is that testing piece. We got to make sure that everything's tested out and make sure it's safe before we can get to final revenue service and get the public on the trains. Next slide, please. So I think I did show this last time, but just kind of a reminder of what has been done in terms of accomplishment. We're moving along here. Next slide, please. We have 16 stations in place. You can see some of the imagery here. And I would just put out, as we start getting into the spring, if anybody's interested in doing tours, I'd be more than happy to do that. We had some good tours last fall and into the winter. Next slide, please. And Sophia, I think we're going to show the video here for the tunnel.
Yes, Jason's getting it queued up for everyone.
The Kenilworth LRT tunnel is a 2,870-foot structure that stretches from just east of West Lake Street to just south of the Cedar Lake Channel. Once constructed, the tunnel will run under Cedar Lake Parkway as well as the Kenilworth Trail. The tunnel is being constructed using a cut-and-cover method, where a trench is first excavated to construct the tunnel, and after the tunnel is constructed, it is then covered up. The tunnel is divided up into 30 segments or cells that are generally 100 feet in length. There are different construction activities going at any one time in 7 consecutive cells, creating a work area over 700 feet long. During the excavation phase, soil is removed from 3 different cells simultaneously, and the contractor installs a series of supports called struts and wailers to provide additional support to build the tunnel. Strut placement slows excavation because materials and equipment have to move around them. Due to tight site access, excavation progresses in a specific linear way to remove and transport soil to other parts of the corridor. The excavation extends about 15 to 20 feet below the water table, further slowing the process as it is more difficult to scoop and place saturated soils. Additionally, divers must check the sheet piles for gaps and make repairs as necessary. This all occurs in a work site that is only about 50 feet wide. Construction of the tunnel involves pouring concrete in 6 different phases, each needing time to cure before the next phase of work can start. Once excavation is completed in a cell, a concrete tremi-seal ranging from 4 to 10 feet in thickness is poured underwater to create an anchor for the tunnel structure and seals off the excavation from groundwater so the tunnel can be constructed in dry conditions. After the water is removed from the cell, the sheet piles are sprayed with concrete to create a uniform surface. A layer of concrete is poured on top of the rough tremi surface to create a level surface for tunnel construction. The struts and wailers are removed and a concrete slab is poured to create the tunnel floor, which will serve as the final surface for the track bed and rails. The tunnel walls and ceiling are poured in one concrete pour in about 30-foot-long segments. A final topping layer of concrete is then poured. The finished tunnel includes a waterproof membrane to prevent water from entering the finished tunnel and steel rebar to make it structurally sound. The access constraints limit the opportunity to work simultaneously in multiple cells. There is generally only one concrete pour that can take place on a day. This is more challenging because of the inability to access the tunnel site from the west end of the corridor due to the construction of the secant pile wall adjacent to the Cedar Isle condos. As the work progresses across the parkway, about 1 cell is completed per month. Project staff remain committed to providing frequent updates to the community regarding this work. For the most up-to-date project information, please visit greenlineext.org.
All right. Mr. Chair, I saw in a comment that there might be an interest in seeing some
Thank you,
cost per mile of
everybody,
the
for
projects. I
joining
actually
us
have some
today. We're
information that was
going to
posted through
talk
a
about the
Seattle
Blue
paper
Line
earlier
extension,
in
our draft
21 that
route
we could share.
modification report.
We'll get that out to folks.
Just
So we can get back to the PowerPoint there. All right, next slide, please. Well, I think it's important to remind folks why we're here. I think it was mentioned earlier in the meeting minutes. We're actually getting closer to $2 billion of development already occurring or in the planning stages being approved on this project. Oh, here we go. So in terms of the construction, 75% of the Minnesota counties have someone bringing a paycheck home on this project. That's pretty significant. You see the stats here. I won't necessarily go through them all, but point out the DBE. There's something we chart very closely on all our projects, all our contracts, and the civil construction currently running just under 21% over the 16% goal. Next slide, please. So in terms of upcoming community outreach, we have a lot of pieces happening later this spring and fall, but as I said, we'll kind of ramp up tours, not only for folks on this committee that want to do that, but for the public. And we'll be doing town halls to talk about what's going to be happening in construction this year, and through also pop-up events. And we do have, looks like we're scheduled to be at various city council meetings to give a presentation to the individual cities later in March. And we will continue with our weekly construction updates. We're doing every other week right now while construction is a little slowed with the chilly weather, but we'll advance that up to weekly once we get into the spring and start ramping up in construction. So I think that with Mr. Chair, I think that's that's the end of my presentation here.
Great, thank you, Jim. And why don't we take the presentation down and just open it up for some additional questions. And I invite everyone to show, if you're comfortable, keep your video on so we can see each other, just at least during these conversations. And I'll open it up. Jim, I really appreciate this. Is a lot of information that gives greater clarity about the pathway forward. It is much about the process as it is the substance of what we're facing. But does anybody have any questions or comments or feedback? Commissioner Gotel.
Thank you, Chair Zolli, and thank you, Jim, for that presentation and going over this. Some of this is repetitive, but it's always good to hear a lot of this information again because there's so much to it. It's a very meaty subject, and we've been through this before, so I appreciate that. I have talked to some reporters, and I had talking points, and very similar to what was in the PowerPoint when I spoke to them. But one question they asked that I would like an answer to is they asked, well, the trains are already here. We're going to do some testing, but because they're going to be sitting for such a long time, are we actually going to run them on the other tracks? Are we going to put them on the other lines and utilize them for some period of time, or are we just going to keep them in storage?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioner. Yes, that's a good question. We have 26 of the trains here. There's still one out in Sacramento at Siemens factory. So they are undergoing commissioning. We're also doing some adding some advanced or some more robust camera security elements to those. And we have committed as Metro Transit that we would get that equipment on before we'd use these trains in revenue service. But the intent is that once that is all done, we will have those trains out in service. Given the COVID situation and the supply and demand issues, the supply chain, we've been a little challenged in getting all that equipment on our trains. But as soon as that happens, we will put those out in revenue service in advance of the Green Line extension opening up.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, comments, feedback? Mayor Spano.
Thanks, Chair. Jim, thank you for the presentation. I do want to kind of go back just a little bit, Jim, because I think obviously there's a lot of interest and attention that's been devoted to the announcement that came out here a little bit ago. And I appreciate the information that you shared. I guess I want to dig a little bit deeper into understanding how we kind of got to where we're at. And you may have answers to these things. You may need to circle back, and I'm happy to circle back. But I think questions around, when we went for example, I think that one of the issues that I remember vividly back when we had our last budget challenge was going from preliminary to final engineering on the project. And I remember the very big budget increase and a lot of anxiety. And we understood that when you go from preliminary to final engineering, there's things that come up that nobody knew about. That having been said, I guess I'm curious if you can give us a better sense of why maybe the sort of whoever was hired to do the geology and analysis of the corridor didn't identify that we wouldn't be able to use traditional piling methods and construction methods in the corridor, when we went from preliminary to final. I would have thought that that would have been the place that we would have discovered that. And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about, I understand that when we had our sort of bids were going out and the crash wall was identified, we knew that it was an issue, but I think as you said today, we didn't realize kind of how involved it would be and what that cost would be. I guess I'm curious if you can share a little bit more of the detail, because I think for myself, as a strong supporter of this project and have been for a long, long time, I, like Commissioner Gattel and others, are going to get questions about, you guys were all on the corridor management committee, and you should. Why didn't you know that? Didn't you talk about this? And I think getting a little bit more detail on some of those things would be useful. And then I have some questions about kind of how we move forward. But I guess I want to start there, if I could.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, or Mr. Chair, Mayor. Well, let's start with the Kenilworth Tunnel. So, going back to preliminary engineering and design, we had identified that we needed to do something different in terms of getting the what's called supportive excavation. That's essentially the sheet piles that went in, so you could build a tunnel inside that excavation. And due to the vibration concerns, we had to go to an alternative method. Traditionally, the sheet piles are vibrated in or pounded in, and that was going to be too much disruption, essentially, to the Cedar Isles condominium building. And so we committed to use a method to press in the piles. So back in preliminary engineering, we had our engineers looking at this. We brought in the equipment supplier that provides these type of machinery to get these sheets in by a hydraulic push-in method. And we had them look at the boring logs. I don't know how many borings we have through this area, but it's a lot. And I don't have that number right handy, but we had AET, our engineering firm, looking at the soil conditions, identifying. We shared the logs with that supplier, and everybody around the table said, yeah, this can work. We can make this work. And so we continued on doing more refinement through advanced design, and our consultant AECOM had looked at it and said, yeah, we can make this work. Further conversations with the suppliers of this type of equipment, everybody said it was going to work. When we got into it, we had issues. We couldn't get the sheets in on their own with just pressing them in. We had some obstructions, just the density of the soil. That combination caused that they had to auger in front of the sheets as they put the sheets in. And the result of that caused settlement at the ground surface. And that's where we said, we're going to have some caution here as we go past the buildings, and we really can't do that press-in pile method, and we can't do the vibratory method either. So we had to come up with an alternative method. That process led us to the secant pile wall solution, and we had that really disrupted how the contractor was going to do the work. And this is while the contractor is doing the work. So we already have them under contract, and so we're kind of in a spot where we have to figure out a solution here with our contractor, with our engineers, and came up with a secant. That created a lot of challenges in terms of getting this tunnel done. The secant's not right in the middle of the tunnel excavation, but it's in the middle enough to cause a disruption of how the contractor was originally going to do the work. So that's really the crux of why we got here. And because of all those elements, it's taken more time to install the sheets. I think I don't know if I've got those months of time, but we had, I think it went twice as long was originally bid or anticipated because of the obstructions and all the challenges of getting the sheets in with that augering. And the contractors needing more time to get this tunnel done than was originally anticipated, both our designers and the contractor when they bid this. And that's really what's driving this length of the 34 months to the work. Now the corridor protection, I would say that's still in a mix, but if you combine all these pieces, you put the corridor protection, the Eden Prairie Town Center, the Kenilworth Tunnel, put those all in the mix, the contractor is saying, hey, I originally bid it as this, and now you got all these pieces.
Yeah.
I can't do it in that time.
Right.
And so the corridor protection, if we just had the corridor protection on its own, it probably wouldn't have been such an impact.
Mm-hmm.
But with the tunnel, with the station, and the productivity concerns that they raised, it's just a combination of all those pieces coming together that really created the challenge.
So I thank you for that, Jim. And I appreciate it. I'm certainly familiar with that process. I used to do bidding for projects not a project of this scope and complexity, but used to do that in the construction world. So I'm certainly familiar with change orders and how that works and approvals and all of it. I think your answer leads me to kind of one of my observations, which is, or a further question, which is, we had a whole bunch of experts come in and sort of look at this, and they all said that they thought it would work a certain way and it didn't. And so what protections are in our contract that when we hire someone who gives us an assurance, they're held to account for that? Or I ask because, is there a way, whether it's with AECOM or any of the other consultants that we worked with, do they have any accountability for having, provided advice that led the project down a certain path, which we're now having to adjust for?
Yeah, I would say there's accountability, Mr. Chair, Mayor, on that, and it's something we're continuing to work with our consultants on. Keep in mind, we still have a lot of work to do, and I'm not going to be able to do this project on my own. I'm an engineer, but I'm not a structural engineer, and we need our engineer right beside us to essentially deal with issues that come up. Because on a project like this, or even smaller projects, you're doing a roof project, things are going to change from what you originally intended and what you plan to do. And we need our engineer beside us to essentially give us that expertise to approve things when they change. And we need to continue to have that working relationship as we see this project out. We have a long road to go to get to the end here. And we need to continue with that partnership with our engineering consultants as we get to the finish line on this project.
Okay. Then let me just pivot. I have other questions kind of looking back, but as you sort of talk about moving forward, it's maybe a good opportunity to sort of pivot forward. My guess is that most of the locations that you have ongoing concerns about cost increases, and you'd said that right now it's change order of up to 210 million, might be less, might be more. Where are most of those concerns still sort of focused around the corridor, the Kenilworth corridor area?
Mr. Chair, Mayor, I would say the primary concern from a schedule perspective is the tunnel. It's the long lead. Secants are really that piece that's the long lead, and that's what our focus is. And that's really, I see. We already have, like I said, we have over 60% done. If you go out to Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, Hopkins, even your city, there's a lot of things built already. We still have some freight to do, still some freight to do in your city and in Hopkins to get that done. But we're out of the ground on a good chunk of this. It's the tunnel that's really the challenge. And the corridor protection, that's moving along pretty well as well. They already have all the foundations in on that and good portion of the walls being in. We're also having some challenges up in the Glenwood area. That's we've had some issues up there that we're working through. But I would say Glenwood and the Kenilworth are our primary, big pieces to tackle yet on this project.
Okay. So thanks for that, Jim. So let me ask you, related to that, I guess there's sort of a cascading series of things that come to mind. But what I'm most curious about is moving forward. I think that I think it's our obligation for us to really take this moment to contemplate every potentiality of ways that we can move forward on this project. And so I'm curious, what conversations have been had with the state, what conversation, I should say, with, the legislature, or the governor's office, or whomever, who have we talked to at FTA about our flexibility and authority? I know that there are, I do know that, FTA has some authority to provide work, sort of approvals outside the scope of projects and give projects flexibility. especially as it relates to the tunnel area and relooking at that, because I just think that when I look at what's going on in St. Louis Park or Hopkins and in other places, things are moving along. I see progress. There's not a lot that's happening in Hopkins and St. Louis Park, I should say, just because, there's not as much digging and bridge building that needs to happen in our communities. But I think going back and asking the questions, sort of taking a moment to sort of step back and I'm not saying to stop or go backwards with the project, but to really sort of assess what are all of our options moving forward and to contemplate them, to come up and share sort of really publicly a plan of how these are going to be funded. I understand you're having conversations with all sorts of funding partners, but getting that out publicly, sort of noting the major milestones that are still yet to be had on the horizon around costs and project decisions. And I say that because I think, I appreciate one of the questions I had was about public input and discussion around all of these things that are coming up. And I appreciate you're having town halls and tours and council presentations. I'm not sure, when you talk about public engagement, there's lots of different levels, right? There's sort of to inform, there is to sort of consult, there is then also to collaborate. I'm not sure kind of what this public outreach is intended, if it's purely informative. But I think for myself, and I'm going to volunteer myself and our city, in this regard, I think that we're going to need as a CMC to be more involved in and aware of the changes that are happening and how they're happening and how they're impacting the budget. And I think maybe, and I haven't asked this of the chair, I haven't said anything to anybody really about this, but I appreciate that we're moving to like every other month meetings, but I think maybe having monthly meetings, and I think maybe having other meetings that involve resources that cities might be able to bring to bear to support the work that Met Council is doing. I'm not suggesting that, you all need to be doing this on your own, but I do think that I do worry at a higher level that this line is only as good as the system it serves. And for us to be able to move forward and build other lines, the blue line extension and all the other projects that are going to need to be built to make this line successful and all the other lines successful, I think there's a moment right now where people are asking questions, including people who are friendly and myself included. But I also think it's my obligation to maybe be asking for a little bit more detail and a little bit more information, because I think there's questions around what's the next thing. And I believe in this project and I believe in the people who are doing the work around it. But I think the public and a lot of folks need to see that a little bit. They're going to need to see the math, so to speak, as my teacher used to say, need to see the math. And so I would strongly encourage Chair Zelli and Jim for Met Council to sort of take this moment to really reevaluate the way they're doing engagement with their partners, and how they're sharing that information with the public, so that the public can feel confident that they got the right team at the table, which I think they do. But I think they need to know that, and I think we're going to have to show them that work. So, and as I said, I'm volunteering myself in whatever capacity. I was never good at math, even worse at engineering, Jim. So I don't want your job, but certainly, I've done project management and other things, and I'm not looking to be in the kitchen making the stew. But I do think that we need to have some extra eyes on this that are helping and able to support, and then can also explain. So. I want to volunteer myself and the team here at the City of St. Louis Park in whatever capacity we can to be a part of that.
Well, I just jump in and express appreciation for what you've just said and offered and asked for. I think this is a moment when we can have where we really do need to be coming together, understanding. If there's decision making, we need to be having that fully within this committee, and maybe more timely showing the math. I love that. I'm not an engineer either, but I certainly know that seeing the work builds credibility, and it's complicated. And I appreciate Jim's explanation, which is kind of not covering every detail, but really appreciate that having us engaged in this process really helps us kind of understand where we are.
And I'll just close by saying, perhaps, every other month is more of a high level meeting, and maybe, the other months are more in detail, more in depth, and people can kind of self-select exactly how they want to engage with that space. But I just think we're going to need to create some opportunities for folks to have a better level of trust around how the funding decisions are made and how the project engineering's going and all the rest of it. So, hey, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Jim.
No, absolutely. And we have not on the calendars every other month, but I think finding some alternative kind of work sessions or information sessions, we certainly are open, and we'll certainly look at that opportunity. Commissioner Fernando, is that your hand up?
Yes, thank you. And I put some stuff in the chat, but I know some members might be on the phone, so I wanted to also verbally just express and amplify what Mayor Spano is sharing here. I mean, it's about trust with residents, both keeping it and re-earning it at times, depending upon how our communities are kind of interacting with the current state. It's about transparency, not only in information, but what I'm hearing from you, Mayor, is the CMC, we're in a position we're expected to be in a position of information and decision making, and perhaps that's even heightened given kind of where we're at, is what I was hearing, and I just wanted to amplify that, because you said it much better than I will, but it was something to the effect of, we're only as strong as who we're serving, and we are here to build a regional transit system that serves our residents, that connects folks to healthcare and jobs and family and livelihood. And I just really wanted to amplify that verbally for members who might be listening in. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And maybe one more comment. I know, Patrick, you have your hand up.
Chair Zelli, thank you. Jim, thank you for that presentation, and thank you for all the information you provided and the tours you provided in the project, and understanding the complexity that you have to deal with in managing this project. It really is a feat of engineering in a number of spots along this transit line. So thank you for that. There's something to be said for having objectivity in the decision making, but to Mayor Spano's point, I think there's also for us to continue to be more involved in the cities that are very committed, and Hopkins has been very committed to this project. And we've been excited about the project. This is obviously news that none of us want to hear. Our residents, we are not one of the wealthiest cities along this transit line, and our residents have been inconvenienced, in traffic, the businesses, residents, trails, using our trails. We have to not put it lightly, we have a blight of a project, and so on the Shady Oak site. And so I was happy to hear Jim say that, there's obvious work that's needed in Hopkins and St. Louis Park, as Mayor Spano referenced to. So I'm looking forward to how we can have some creative solutions around, if you go along the transit line, that Shady Oak site really stands out as an area that is, it's a storage site. Hopkins is a storage site, and the timing of this project is of as big a concern as anything. We have developers that are coming in and making plans to develop in Hopkins, and pushing this timeline out is a really big issue for our city. And so Mayor Spano referenced to assurances. I would love to see assurances that we are going to be on time with this, because, as we push things out, well, are we going to hit that next target? And can developers count on that when they're coming to our city, and we're working with those developers to bring housing to our city? And so I really just I would love to be part of those conversations, our staff to be part of those conversations. I know Kirsten Elverum has done a great job from the city of Hopkins in being involved with this, but yeah, would love to have the information. And then looking at moving forward, how do we look at that Shady Oak site, and what are some creative opportunities, between Minnetonka, Hopkins, that could be a really marquee site along this transit line. And so if we have time, if we're extending out time, what are some creative options that can be taken? Because we are not only not a wealthy city, we're not a big city. And so using a lot for a large open parking lot, where we are going to have, potential security issues, in monitoring that site. What can we do to creatively look at that site so that we can get some density in that parking, whatever that may be, so that we can have a really marquee development on that site and can bring more riders to this line. So those are just the comments that I wanted to make, and thank you for having me my first time here on the committee.
You're very welcome, and great comments. Thank you, Mayor. And I want to leave enough time to hear from Kirsten Evelyn, since you mentioned her, and we're talking about some of these city partner investments, because it isn't just about transit; it is about economic development, which you're clearly seeing in Hopkins and all of our cities. But first, Commissioner Latranza, you get the last question and comment.
All right, I'll keep it brief. My question, thanks, Chair Zelli, for Mr. Alexander. You talked a little bit about for this 210 million, how you're basically negotiating a list of items with the contractor that will go to mediation, and how that final dollar amount for those could come in higher and could come in lower. My question is sort of twofold. Number one, how is that mediation process similar to or different from the process that we currently go through in negotiating change orders with the independent cost estimates and the contractor price? And then number two, do we yet have, or at what point will we have, a range? In other words, what's the low end of that scale if the mediator sides with us on a number of these items? And what's our maximum exposure on those items if the mediator signs with the contractor on a preponderance of those items?
Sure, Mr. Chair, Commissioner. So this approach that we're going to be entering into is we'll be meeting with a mediator that will give opinion on who's right, essentially. We'll have our case, the contractor will have their case. And these are on elements that we can't get to an agreement on. So we'll essentially try to get resolution with negotiations with the contractor before we go to mediation, so we don't bring the whole kitchen sink to get this resolved. So we hope to get some of that resolved, some of that portion of what that full amount's going to be. But we expect that something's going to go to mediation. So they'll give an opinion, and if we decide not to agree to that, then it would go through a binding arbitration process where we will be bound by that decision of the arbitrator. That would hopefully happen later. Hopefully we don't have to get to that, but that would be later this year. But we will be coming up with our assessment, and it's bit of part of a negotiation process, so it won't necessarily be fully public, but we'll find a way to communicate as best we can as we're proceeding through the process. We have our ECCB to work through, our Met Council to work through on those pieces, and we'll do our best to keep that as full disclosures as we can, understanding that some of this is under negotiation until we get to a mediator, that we won't necessarily be fully public. We just have to, that's just kind of how, negotiations work. But we'll try to be as transparent as possible as we get through those stages. Does that help you explain kind of the process, or?
Yeah, that helps on the process. And Chair Zelli, then at some point will the public know? Because my understanding is for each of these items that will be going to mediation, part of what we're agreeing on is what's the maximum exposure there and what's the minimum exposure. At what point will that be made public, what our maximum exposure would be?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, maybe I could maybe kind of confer with our legal advisor and get back to this group on how we do that process, because I'm not necessarily going to be able to speak all the legalese on this piece here, but we'll find a way. I know there's interest in being transparent as what we're doing here, and I think I'd prefer if we could maybe come back to you on that.
And I think that's a fair comment. We're going, but as I understand it, Commissioner, there will be as we get through this mediation and then ultimately arbitration process to settle this piece of the project, we'll certainly be able to fully disclose that as we get through that. And I think we can get back to is kind of what that timing and what we can and can't, because there's some attorney-client kind of negotiations that we need to ensure we get the better result by that happens through the process. So we'll get back on that. I want to leave enough time to hear, briefly Julie Wishnack, who is the Community Development Director from Minnetonka, and Kirsten Ellerbrum, who's also with the same capacity with Hopkins. We've already talked about development, so I know we're not leaving a ton of time, but Julie, you're going to start off. Kirsten, you're doing important work here, and we know that that this isn't just about transit; it's about the developments, and delays cause challenges. But I see a lot of cranes in the air, and they're not just the project. So go ahead.
Right. Thank you, Chair. I would say I would yield my time to Hopkins, actually. I'll come back another time because I think we only have time for one presentation. I think from Minnetonka's perspective, I have a lot of buildings to show you and a lot of pictures, and so I don't want to spend too much time with that because I do want to hear what Hopkins is doing too. So just to give you a flavor, 1,400 units under construction or about to be under construction in Minnetonka, and half of those are affordable. And so really great stories to share with you. But Kristen, if you don't mind, I think we'll just focus on Hopkins today, and I'll come back another time if that's okay.
Julie, you're welcome, and we're going to have more of these meetings as we've heard and as we should. So thank you for your graciousness. Kirsten.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Julie. That's really generous, but that's how we've worked together throughout this entire time on this project, is really respecting each other. So thanks for giving me some time. I am excited to share the opportunity today to highlight some of the projects that we have going on in Hopkins. And if I get my PowerPoint up. You can go right to the next slide. This slide, I think, is just really telling of our story. Throughout my time in Hopkins, we saw a major project every 3 to 5 years. This shows the last 10 years of development, and it kind of mimics that pattern until last year, when 2021 we approved over 1,000 new housing units in Hopkins. And I think that this is not an anomaly. This is really something that we're going to see continue into 22 and beyond, as we already have another 500 or so units that we're in discussions with developers around. The next slide. The construction pricing has had a major impact on projects, though, and this is a project, Vista 44 by Beacon Interfaith, that actually was approved in 2019, but won't break ground until this summer. We are optimistic that it will get under construction. It's a really unique development. It's 4 stories, 50 units on a 1-acre parcel that really sits right between the Shady Oak Station and the downtown Hopkins Station. It was owned by St. Gabriel's Catholic Church, and they were willing to sell this remnant parcel to Beacon for this project that's going to serve homeless or near homeless families in Hennepin County through the Coordinated Entry Program. They are really wrapping those families with a really high level of supportive services. So we're really confident that's going to be a great model for how to house really difficult, families to find housing for, and they have finally, I think, cleared the financing hurdles that they've been trying to overcome, both because of construction costs continuing to rise, as well as the cost of providing housing for the most needed in the community. So we're anxious for it to get under construction. Next slide is another 100% affordable project that is under construction today. It's an infill development on Main Street, and it is really geared for workforce housing. We worked with the developer to really push those bedroom sizes up because we have heard a real significant need in our community for more moderate priced rental housing for families. This was part of a larger project where Trellis, who's the developer, was also in the process of trying to preserve another housing development in Hopkins called Raspberry Ridge. We provided conduit financing so they could both renovate Raspberry Ridge as well as do this infill construction project. Just super excited about it. It fills in, a real big gap on Main Street, a parking lot that created kind of a missing tooth in our downtown. will, bring housing for families and really add to the vibrancy of Main Street. And it's certainly within walking distance to the downtown Hopkins station. Next slide. Most of our work is really focused around the Blake Road Station. That's where the real significant numbers of new units are going to be constructed. We had really planned for the redevelopment of the corner of Excelsior Boulevard and Blake Road for quite some time, really over a decade of planning around redeveloping what was a very tired strip center, a retail strip center, into a housing and commercial development. And finally, this last year, Trilogy, a developer out of Chicago, came forward with a 3-phase development. We did give approvals for the first phase, which is now under construction. That was about 200 housing units. The second phase, we're expecting to come in this month for approvals in March and April. That will add another 250 housing units and additional square footage of retail. The city did not participate financially except for an environmental cleanup grant that we awarded the project when they were not successful in closing the gap through the other traditional cleanup programs. Next slide. And I don't know if you can all picture what this area has looked like, but there really has been a significant amount of disinvestment in the area. It was never really designed to be very environmentally friendly from a stormwater treatment perspective. It was all impervious surface and really posed some problems for connectivity to the station platform. So the new development will really solve a lot of those problems, create much better connections from the neighborhood surrounding the Blake Road Station, treat the stormwater appropriately, clean up some environmental contamination. It is a market rate development, but from our perspective, market rate housing is also needed in the corridor, and it provides a housing choice that really isn't available today. So we are excited about this project moving ahead. Next slide. But certainly, last but not least, is the biggest project that we have been focusing our efforts on over the last year or so, and that is working on the 325 Blake Road site in collaboration with the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District as owner of the property, and Aladdis as the developer that was selected for the redevelopment of the majority of the site. So together, the site will bring 833 new housing units and a little under 20,000 square feet of retail space. But that really doesn't tell the whole story. There's a lot going on this site. It really has many different development paths within it. There is going to be one building that's completely affordable. There will be a senior co-op building that will bring an ownership opportunity to Hopkins that we have long had a goal to realize. There will be a mixed income rental building. There's also a 14-story building that you can see in the backdrop of this image. That's a new construction technique that we really have not seen since probably the 70s in Hopkins. It is a more costly way to build, but with the proximity to transit really was the way to get the kind of density on this site that we were striving for. There's going to be a hotel component to the top of this building, as well as a sky deck lounge that will be accessible to the public with just fantastic views of downtown Minneapolis and the whole Minnehaha Creek watershed area. There will also be in future phases townhome units and additional retail that will both be in separate buildings as well as embedded within that 14-story building. The overall affordability on this development is going to be 25%, kind of between different AMI breakdowns, kind of hitting all of the different touch points on affordability. Really unique feature is the land that the Watershed District is going to retain. They are retaining several acres to do regional stormwater treatment that is reflected in the ponding on this image, as well as create trail infrastructure and really celebrate Minnehaha Creek, which You know, as you know, the cold storage facility that was there really did not do any of that. We hid the creek from public access, and so we're completely turning that around and making it an amenity on the corridor and really for the region. The city did participate with this project in the form of TIF, and we did go through the land use approvals at the end of 21. So they are poised to start construction on this project in 22 with about a 2-year build out of many of the components. We recently got a Livable Communities grant through the Met Council, and really appreciative of that support. That's going to let us really focus on the public realm and making sure that that is completely inviting to everybody who wants to come visit the site, as well as use wayfinding in, I think, really effective way, bringing people from the station and through the site into the neighboring amenities of this area. So we're looking forward on kind of getting into that next level of detail, working with artists and the developer to create that really important wayfinding and public art component. So I will end with a video that the developer produced for the site, and maybe in the end we can vote whose video is more entertaining, Jim's or ours. If you can load the video.
Wow.
Wow, yeah, there's a lot going on the site. I don't know that the video is all that easy to kind of track through the different development types within it, but I think it gives you an idea of the way we use the site to really maximize the creek as an amenity, drop down the density as you get to the creek, and really focus the intensity right at the connection point with the station. I'd be glad to answer any questions anyone has.
Great presentation. Thank you so much, Kirsten. And we have a minute if anybody has a question. Go ahead, Will.
Chair and Jim, 2 great presentations and videos. So I'm not going to I'm going to stay neutral on that. 2 tactical questions, Jim, and if you've addressed this, my apologies. First, as it relates to your comment on the ability to extend in Minneapolis a little bit of the line for revenue opportunities. Are there revenue opportunities on the southern half over this delay, over this new timeline horizon?
Mr. Chair, well, maybe I should clarify. When I was talking to that was more from a testing perspective. because we see that testing out 14.5 miles is going to be a challenge in any event, and the more we get behind us, the better, before we have to really kind of scramble to get to revenue service, because that's usually how it happens. And there really isn't a way of doing revenue service out the west end without the linkage to our maintenance facility and getting the vehicles, and just the logistics of doing that would be a challenge. We're still trying to work out the details of getting trains out there once the systems is all done, just do the testing. And then we have to figure out, well, what if one of the trains has some maintenance? How do we deal with that? So that just creates some significant challenges. In terms of revenue service from Target coming into the Green Line extension, I don't know if that's something we've really had on our radar. Is more from a testing perspective, because that piece that the connection from the extension to the existing Green Line / Blue Line is really important, and there's going to be a lot of bugs to work out through there. And so the earlier we can get on that, the better. So, and then we have the tunnel left to do. We hopefully we're time ahead of the game to get to revenue service.
Perfect. And last fast question. With the new timeline horizon, Jim, are there opportunities to address the parks and trails and bike paths? What's the impact with that?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Well, so we're actually hopeful, trying to finalize some agreements with Three Rivers and Twin City Western Railroad to open up the segment between, I think we've talked about this in the past, between Beltline and Wooddale. We're also looking to open up that segment from essentially the depot and Hopkins out to 11th. So I think those are on track. Those pieces are constructed. We just need to get those agreements finalized. And then we're looking at other opportunities. I would say the piece from Beltline up to 21st in Minneapolis is going to be the biggest challenge, because that's a long lead with the tunnel. We're also looking closely at the Glenwood piece, but we are looking closely at those. As I said, I'm a biker and I'm very interested in that myself, and so it is something that's on the radar. But we're still going to need to flesh out the details on those other legs.
I appreciate we're just slightly over time, and there's even more information that we should be sharing and will be sharing. So I just want to thank everybody for your questions, your comments. This group is so important to both the success and the process towards success for this project. And I have to tell you, okay, I'm going to disclose my vote. Boy, Hopkins. That's why we're doing this. I mean, if there's any more reason to think about the kind of urban placemaking vibrancy that kind of results from this project, that video kind of describes it. And I have to say, the other part of Met Council being able to support the project, not just with livability grants, but with project vouchers for deeply affordable housing and access to transit, is part of the whole picture we think of in this metro. So with that, I know we have on the calendars for another meeting on April 6th, but I've heard a deep desire for additional time to get together, information, some cadence of accountability, I will call it, toward both schedule and the process as we go forward. We will commit to that, and unless anybody has any final burning last word, I'm going to adjourn the meeting, but know that we won't be adjourned for too long. Thank you again for your time today, for your ongoing support and interest, your solid questions, and there's more to present in the weeks and the months ahead. So stay tuned. Thanks, everybody.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to tell Commissioner Gattell, I think we're all thinking about her district, her home city of Richfield.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I had a briefing this morning already from the city of Richfield. I appreciate that.
All right.
My thoughts go out to Richfield. Absolutely.
Yes, keep them in your prayers, please.
Best wishes.
Thanks.
All right. Enjoy this sunny day.
Thank you.
Bye.